Okay, I have 10 o'clock. We will go ahead and call to order. This is Menard County Court sitting in probate matters today in cause number 2023-02184 in the matter of the estate of Ernest Clifton. Mr. Chapman, I understand you're representing the applicant here. I'll let you begin with your announcement and then we'll hopefully swear in your witnesses.
All right. Thank you, Judge. I'm Shane Chapman. I'm here representing Barbie Pearson, who is the applicant for the probate of this will. As I indicated to the court before we went to live stream, there has been an answer filed on behalf of Marilyn Glasscock by a law firm out of Georgetown, and she is represented by a Carla Colabianchi, if I pronounced her name correctly. They have not filed a contest to this, and my last emails with Ms. Colabianchi were basically, could you give us the results of this hearing today? So I don't anticipate them appearing. With that said, I will have two witnesses, and that is my client, an applicant, Barbie, and also then Mr. Young as a witness to the signing of the will.
Understood. Before I swear your witnesses in, there are several people observing in the galley. Is there anyone that wishes to address the court or to be heard here today? Okay, hearing no answer, I will go ahead and swear in your witnesses. And I believe you said Mr. Young and Ms. Pearson, if you would both raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
I do.
Okay, thank you both. You may proceed, counsel.
Judge, in the interest of saving Mr. Young some time, I would like to kind of call him out of order and get his testimony first and then let him go if that's agreeable.
That's fine with me, thanks.
All right. Mr. Young, would you state your name, please, sir?
David Allen Young.
And you are an attorney, is that correct?
That's correct. Been an attorney for 48 years.
And in that 48 years, have you had occasion to draft wills from time to time?
I've probably drafted at least 200 wills during that time.
Have you also been a notary during your legal career?
I have been.
And I want to direct your attention to the will that we've offered to probate here today. You have seen a copy of that, is that correct?
I have.
And that is attached to our first amended application for probate. I believe I forwarded a copy of that to you as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
In that particular document, there is a signature from an Ernest Clifton and then a notarization by you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you know Ernest Clifton?
I knew who he was. He was not a client, but I knew who he was. I believe my wife taught several of his children in school.
Let me ask you, the document that we're offering as the last will and testament of Ernest E. Clifton, is that a document that you prepared or drafted?
No.
What is your involvement in this last will and testament then?
I don't specifically recall Mr. Clifton coming into the office here 10 years later, but early on in my practice, I developed the procedure that anytime I was asked to serve as a witness or a notary on a last will and testament, I would ask the person first if the instrument was the last will and testament, if they intended to publish it as their last will and testament, and if they wanted me to serve as a witness or a notary to the execution of that document. And I did that in all cases, and I have reviewed the will. I've looked at my signature. That is, in fact, my signature. So I can assure the court that when Mr. Kit Clifton came in and asked me to witness his signature, that I did ask him if the document was his last will and testament, if he wished to publish it as his last will and testament, and if he wanted me to witness his signature and serve as notary. And by affixing my signature, I know that that process was followed in this case. I also noticed that the two witnesses had signed somewhere else. And so before I affixed my notary acknowledgement, I X'd through the places where the names of the witnesses would normally have appeared before I signed and affixed my notary seal.
And that is on the last page of the document that we're offering today as the last will and testament of Ernest E. Clifton.
That's correct.
And the date of that notarization was the 10th day of September 2013, correct?
That's correct.
So then Mr. Ernest Clifton would have signed that document in front of you on that date of September 10th, 2013.
Yes, he would have signed it in my presence.
And it would have done so after you had asked those questions of him, such as, do you understand this is your last will and testament?
Yes, that's correct.
And at that time, was he over 18 years of age?
Absolutely.
And was he of sound mind?
We had a brief visit, and yes, in my opinion, he was of sound mind.
Certainly, you wouldn't have notarized a signature if you felt that he was incompetent or unable to execute the document.
That's correct.
Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Mr. Young, I just really one question. Do you have any information on these witnesses or how they came into play with the creation of this document?
I knew both of the witnesses, particularly Faye Dance. I did some legal work for her through the years. I knew her well enough that back in 2013, she was certainly well known in the community, well known to me, and she was certainly competent at that time. I did some legal work for her, I think, as late as 2021. The other witness, I knew her, but not nearly as well as Ms. Dance. I believe they were sisters.
And just go ahead, Mr. Chapman.
With respect to Faye Dance, Mr. Young, do you know that she is now passed away?
Yes, I handled her estate for her children.
Okay. And with respect to Orme Priest, do you have any knowledge yourself about her whereabouts or how she is doing mentally?
Not at the present.
Okay. Judge, we will address that with Miss Pearson.
Understood. I just wanted to confirm your testimony is that this was brought to you. You did not witness these witnesses signing. You just performed your duties as a notary, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I witnessed Mr. Clifton signing the deed, and I served as a notary, but I had nothing to do with the signatures of the other two.
Understood. Okay. I don't have any further questions. Mr. Chapman, unless you need him further, I don't mind if he's dismissed at any time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Judge, if Mr. Young could be dismissed. If that's acceptable to the court.
Ms. Eggleston, did you have something?
Yes, sir. I do have Miss Janelle Coatman with me now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Young, unless you have anything further to add, we'll dismiss you. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you so much, Judge.
All right, with that, Judge, my next witness would be Barbie Pearson.
You're clear to proceed. Thank you.
All right, Miss Pearson, could you state your full name, please?
Barbara Clifton Pearson.
And do you go by Barbie?
Yes, I do.
You have filed an application for probate in this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that to probate the last will and testament of Ernest E. Clifton?
Yes, sir.
The document that you've offered to probate that's been attached to your first amended petition, is that the last will and testament of your father, Ernest E. Clifton, dated September 10th, 2013?
Yes.
I want to go through a document that we filed with the court that I think you're familiar with. It's called a proof of death and other facts. You know that document?
Yes, sir.
Did you have that document notarized before a notary public before we submitted that with the court?
Yes.
Going through that document, did Ernest Clifton die on or about July 6, 2023 in Menard County, Texas?
Yes.
At that time, was he 76 years of age?
Yes.
At the time of his death, was he actually domiciled there in Menard County, Texas?
Yes, he was.
Did he leave a valid will dated September 10th, 2013?
Yes.
You have not produced the original of that September 10th, 2013 will. And I want to ask you some questions about that. Why has that not been produced?
We've not been able to locate the original will. All we found was the copy of the will that he had in his lockbox that he had stored in my sister's garage when he moved out of his apartment in Menard.
Okay. Have you done a thorough and exhaustive search of the various records to try to find that will?
Yes, sir. We've searched through all of the boxes and crates that were stored in my sister's garage. I've looked through my documents that I have here because I've always been his medical power of attorney, looked through all of those. And we looked through his travel trailer where he lived briefly before he moved in with Miss Glasscock. And she told us that she had given us all of the documents that she had that belonged to our father. So we have looked everywhere we possibly could look.
Do you think that there is any way that original can be located at this point in time?
Not at this point.
The document that you've offered as a copy, is that a true and correct copy of the original will?
Yes, sir.
And how do you know that?
It is.
How do you know that?
How do I know that? When my dad came to visit me in Austin back probably around early 2013, he had talked to me about wanting to do a will because he had just been divorced, wanted to make sure that everything was taken care of. We had a younger sister who was not married. He wanted to make sure that she had a place to live, and he wanted to make sure that his things were distributed the way that he wanted them distributed. And so I had a benefit attorney where I work who gave me a template for my husband and I had that template on my computer, and I shared that with my father, and he wanted to do that will. And I told him I would let him use my laptop to do that will, but he would have to do that himself. And then I would check his spelling. And then I told him he needed to take it to an attorney to review. My apologies, Judge. I need to turn my robot vacuum off. It's going to start.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. And so I told him once he did it, he needed to take it to an attorney, and he needed to make sure that it was completed properly and that everything was there that needed to be there. My printer was broken at my house, so I had not replaced it yet. So he had me email that to my sister, Farrah Copeman, and then she was going to print it out so that he could take it to an attorney, get witnesses, and have it notarized.
Okay, so let me ask you a series of questions about that. So based upon that, is the document that you're offering as the last will and testament of your father the exact same one that you saw him complete on your laptop?
Yes, sir.
And then when you forwarded it to Farrah for her to print out, would that explain why you have a pagination problem in the last couple of pages of the document?
I would assume so, sir, based on probably spacing and formatting, however her computer printed it out.
Okay. And when you found this document, where was it found?
It was found in his little lockbox where he used to keep all of his important papers. It was just a little box that he carried with him forever. Even when my mother was still alive, he carried that box and put all of his important papers. and he had it in there. It was not stapled. And so he had it in there together. And then he had a bunch of other stuff in there. One of the pages was really crumpled. And at the bottom, it was one of the last pages actually that we found that we didn't realize we didn't have in what we submitted to you. And it was stuffed under something else as we were looking for that page, but he didn't have them stapled. He didn't have them together. So we just kind of pieced it together based on all the documents that were in that box.
All right. And is that why you had me file a first amended petition with that all put in the correct order?
Yes, sir.
And just to make sure we're clear, have you done a diligent search for that original?
Yes, sir, we have.
Did your father have any sort of safe deposit box where an original might be kept?
He did not.
Have you checked with the banks where he banked to determine whether or not he had a safe deposit box?
I asked both banks if he had anything else there, and they indicated that he did not.
And where did he normally bank?
He had two bank accounts. He had one in Menard, and that's where he did the majority of his banking the last few years. He had a bank account in Llano also, because that's where he had his mortgage to the house that he owned in Mason that he had actually bought from Miss Dance. And then from what I understand, and I didn't know this till after his death, he closed the account, the checking account in Llano, and moved everything totally to Menard.
And neither of those institutions had any sort of safe deposit box for him?
No, sir.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a couple of things about the devisees under the will and then the heirs. So let's start with the devisees. The devisees, the people that receive under the will, are who?
Kyle Pearson, which is his grandson, my son, and then all 6 of my siblings and myself. And so Nancy Douglas, James Clifton, John Clifton, Chris Clifton, Farrah Copeman, and Mindy Del Toro.
Okay. And all 7 of you, the biological children of Ernest Clifton?
Yes, sir, we are.
And then under the devisees, we also have the additional devisee of your son.
Right.
Now, if we move over to the heirs of his body, those that would inherit from him if there were no will, is that the same 7 biological children?
Yes, sir.
And then potentially Marilyn Glasscock if she is a surviving spouse. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And as you sit here today, have you ever seen any sort of marriage certificate or know if they actually married?
I have not. Didn't know they were married until a couple months before he passed away.
At the time that he executed this will back in 2013, was he widowed from Velda Darlene Gamble Clifton?
Yes, sir, he was.
And is that to your mother?
Yes.
And the mother of the other 6 siblings?
Yes, sir.
So at the time that he executed this will in 2013, was he married at all?
He was not.
Okay. Is it your knowledge and belief that this was his last will and testament?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any reason to believe that he would have revoked this for any reason?
No, sir.
Did he continue to remain close to all of his 7 children as well as any additional grandchildren?
Yes.
And did each of you have frequent contact with your father?
We did.
The will, as we talked about a minute ago, was actually notarized by David Young. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But as you testified to, that draft of that was something that you had received that you allowed your father to modify for his personal use.
Yes, sir.
You did not fill that out for him.
I did not.
There's some questions popped up about the witnesses that are on the will. Faye Dance, do you know that Faye Dance is now deceased?
Yes, sir.
And Orame Priest, do you know her whereabouts and mental status?
She has dementia, and I believe she's in a nursing home in Fredericksburg.
Okay. And is that the reason that those two witnesses are not here to testify today?
Yes, sir.
At the time that your father executed this will in September of 2013, was he over 18 years of age?
Yes, he was.
Was he of sound mind?
Yes.
Has he ever had any sort of mental incapacity prior to the last few years of his life?
No, the last few months of his life, he seemed to be confused a lot when we talked to him, and he had heart issues, and so sometimes you talk to him and you couldn't even understand him.
Were there any other children born or adopted by your father after this September 2013 will?
No, sir.
Are you named as the independent executor in the will?
Yes.
Are you qualified to serve as independent executor?
Yes, sir.
In other words, have you ever had any sort of mental incapacity or disability?
No.
And are you a convicted felon or otherwise unsuitable?
No.
Are you asking the court to allow this will to be admitted to probate and appoint you as the independent executor of your father's estate?
Yes, sir.
Is there a necessity to issue letters testamentary and appoint you as the independent executor of his estate?
Yes.
And what does his estate basically consist of at this time?
At this time, it's a house that he has in Mason, Texas, some property and a house that he actually, like I said, purchased from Miss Stance. He also has a vehicle, got a couple of travel trailers, and some tools and some other things that he's got that we need to split and separate.
Your Honor, we pass the witness.
Ms. Pearson, can you help me understand the states of the will when you found it? I think you said it was not sequenced, and you mentioned that there's pages that look crumbled. There, it appears to me the last two pages, which, you know, of course, is the signature page, look as if they were significantly damaged. Can you just share how you put this together and the state of these things when you found them?
Well, my sister Farah found them in the box for us, and she gave me the copies. And then when we were looking for those pages, she went back through, and that's where she found them crumbled in there in the box. And she showed me the box. He's got stuff from pictures. And so when he moved, my dad moved quite a bit in the last couple of years, and he was moving, and he just stuffed things in that box, pictures and medicine, and it just kind of just fell down in that box. So there were a lot of things that were crumpled at the bottom of that box: papers, receipts, loan documents that he had signed that were copies for him from the bank in Llano and from in Menard as well. So there was just a lot of stuff in there that we had to go through. Some things that probably should have been thrown away many years ago were also in there.
But these last two pages were unattached to the rest of the document and were crumbled when they were found?
Yes, sir. And none of the pages were attached. They were all just kind of laying in there. And he had some papers that were laying in there on the side. And then there were some that were all crumbled in the bottom of the box.
Do you have any theory as to why your father might have removed the last two pages and crumbled them?
I have no idea. My dad was not the best at keeping records. And so he would just throw things in boxes, especially if he was moving. He would just move things and just put stuff away in a box. But like I said, they weren't stapled. They weren't put together. They were just kind of laying in that box.
Okay, thank you. And then would you help me understand the suit with Miss Glasscock and how this factors into any of this property that's in discussion?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Just tell me the situation with Miss Glasscock at the moment and the suit that
Okay.
is active between the two parties, as I understand it.
So for Miss Glasscock, we actually just met. I didn't meet Miss Glasscock until December, and my siblings, some of them met her in September, and then again in October at my nephew's wedding reception. I did not meet her until December. We had no idea that they were married. He was at my house in July of 22 talking to me about taking over his finances and giving him an allowance because he was trying to make sure that he could save some money. And he also was worried that he might miss something in his payments because he was getting to a point where he felt like he was missing things. And so we talked about it, and I told him, I said, I can't just take care of something for you. You have to put me on the accounts. You have to make sure that I'm authorized on your accounts. And so he left my house. The next thing we know, he met Miss Glasscock. From what I understand, he met her at a convenience store in a parking lot. That's all I know. And then he moved in with her 2 weeks later. And he was living with her. And that's all we knew at that point. And then when my dad passed away, well, my dad fell and broke it. He was in the hospital. They sent him to a rehab facility. He was in the rehab facility maybe 2-3 days, and she checked him out, said she could take better care of him, brought him home. And then a couple days later, fell and broke his neck. And that's when we found out that they were married. And we had been telling doctors and hospitals, I've always been the person that was the contact at the hospitals. And I did have some facilities still calling me, asking me questions. And we kept telling them, this is not his wife. She's not married. I think she went and got a power of attorney, which actually revoked my power of attorney that I had. And then when he broke his neck, he was in the hospital, and he actually went to another rehab facility after that to get his strength up. And he was in there for maybe 1 day, and she checked him out, could take better care of him herself, and came home. And probably about 6 weeks later, he passed away. And she had never, any conversation we had, my husband and I were there in February, and we were down by the river with her talking to one of her neighbors, and her neighbor asked Marilyn who had done the road work from her house down to the river, the path. And that was my dad that had done that. And she referenced my dad as her friend. So she's never referenced my dad as her husband in the presence of any of us children. Nobody knew except for one sister who had just found out about it when she had taken him out of rehab the very first time. She didn't tell us. He said he was going to tell us, and he never told us.
Did you find evidence, or were you presented with evidence they were legally married?
No, sir. We've never seen a marriage certificate. And she's never used my dad's name. She did not help us plan the funeral. She did not help us pay for the funeral. She actually showed up at the funeral late, and she came to the visitation, but she didn't talk to us, didn't hang around us, the kids. It's just not a relationship there. We just didn't know her.
Judge, I might be able to clear some of this up to your original question, if I may. Barbie, on the assets that we were talking about, were any of those assets acquired during this relationship, whether it's a legal marriage or not?
No, sir. The only asset that was acquired during their marriage is the car that she's driving. That's the only asset.
All right. And is there a note on that car, or do you know?
I am not sure. I believe there is, but I have no idea.
All right. The house that you referenced earlier, was that something that was owned by your father prior to whatever relationship with Miss Glasscock?
The one in Mason, yes, sir.
All right. And at the time of his death, he was living at her house that she owned prior to any relationship. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct.
You're not making any claim to her house, and she would not have any claim to his house.
Right.
Okay.
Is she currently in possession or occupying any of these assets that are listed in this will?
She is not.
Although, is she currently, to your knowledge, I guess, receiving rent off of the of Ernest
House in Mason? Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, she is. She is receiving the rent. My dad leased his place in Mason, and she has been receiving the rent on that place in Mason.
So she's in control of that asset and currently renting it out as the landlord.
Correct.
Well,
And
I guess
she did.
for
Go ahead, Shane.
clarification purposes, it's in Ernest Clifton's name, and
Yes.
she doesn't have I don't believe a legal right to be receiving the rent off of that or to be in control of that asset. But I think that's where we sit at this point in time. The lease was
Yes, they.
pre-existing lease.
Yes.
Can you, Mr. Chapman, and feel free to answer on behalf of your client, the nature of the suit, is that most of what we're in dispute about is the control of current assets, or all I have is there's a notice that there is a suit in the documentation file, but I don't have the actual details of that.
That there is a what? A suit?
That she has been sued.
Oh.
Ms. Glasscock has been served with a lawsuit.
Well, the only dispute that I would be aware of is the house in Mason that was Mr. Clifton's separate property estate. It's not a homestead because neither of them were living there. It's an asset of his estate. I think once an executor is appointed, then that executor has the authority to take control of that asset and deal with it appropriately. Obviously, there's some. I'm trying to think of what kind of, if Miss Glasscock was married to him, what kind of surviving spouse claims that she might have, and I don't know what those would be off the top of my head.
Understood. Okay. Do you have any further information or evidence to present here this morning?
I would offer the two affidavits that we've previously e-filed of two witnesses to Mr. Clifton's signature. I don't know that they're necessary in light of Mr. Young's testimony, but we have e-filed those just in an abundance of caution as to two witnesses as to his signature. I believe the applicable statutory provision for an non self-proving will is in section 256 of the Estates Code, and that allows for the will to be proven by a subscribing witness, which I think Mr. Young qualifies as, since he saw him sign and notarize that signature, or by the testimony of two witnesses taken in open court, or by deposition as to his signature. And I think the two affidavits meet that requirement. So we filed those in an abundance of caution.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? I'll give everyone else another opportunity that would like to speak or contribute to this hearing today. Okay. Hearing no answer, I'm going to take the evidence and testimony presented here under advisement, and I will issue a ruling in response to this application as soon as I'm able to provide one. Is there anything further to come before the court today?
I don't believe so. I think we've submitted a proposed order.
Yes, sir. I do have a copy of that. Okay. All right. Hearing nothing further, this hearing is dismissed. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your information this morning.